Hey everybody! Welcome to CAF Warbird Tube, the show where we talk about World War II, aviation, history, and so much more. Warbird Tube is produced by the Commemorative Air Force, the world's largest flying museum. Our mission is to educate, inspire, and honor through flight and living history experiences. The CAF began the Warbird movement more than 65 years ago, and thanks to the support of individuals like you, we continue to grow strong. We hope you enjoyed this episode, and now our host, Steve Buss. Thanks for watching and keep 'em flying.
Welcome to episode 99 of CAF Warbird Tube. On this episode, we're going to take a look at a relatively unknown British pilot training program that took place here in the United States. And hopefully by the time this episode is over, you and I are both going to learn more about the British training program that took place at a number of different locations around the States. We'll get into that in just a minute. But before we get started, I'd ask you to do us a favor. If you haven't already done so, please take a second to like, share, or subscribe to Warbird Tube. And if you do subscribe on YouTube, make sure you click that little bell icon to get notifications about any new episodes of Warbird Tube as we post them up live here either on Facebook or on YouTube. So joining me now from the #1 British Flying Training School Museum in Terrell, Texas, is Executive Director Patrick Hotard and Museum Board Member Rudy Bowling. Gentlemen, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Glad to be here.
Well, Patrick, we'll start with you. Tell us a little bit about your background and how you became the executive director of the museum.
Well, I'm originally from Louisiana, went to LSU, and sort of fell into museum work about, going to date myself a little bit here, about a quarter century ago. And so I've been in and out of nonprofit and museum work for about 25 plus years. And the position came open here a couple years ago, and it was pretty much an application and apply process interview. And I've been here about a year and a half now, a little over a year and a half, and we've been, I think, making a lot of progress and enjoy working here and working with the board members, such as Rudy. And I think we're doing a lot of good work and a lot of educational programs, and we've made a lot of progress as an institution.
Very good. And Rudy, how about your background?
I'm a veteran of the airline industry. I started out with Braniff Airways, went through 2 bankruptcies there, decided I needed to find a little bit better place, so I went to work for Southwest Airlines and in warehousing, stores, that sort of thing. But I've always had a real interest in aviation history, having worked in the airlines and meeting some pilots and just the whole gamut. After I retired, I had the opportunity to start volunteering here at the museum, and it's just taken on a life of its own as far as I'm concerned. My wife complains that I spend too much time at the museum, and I'm trying to fix that right now. But it's a labor of love. Terrell is my hometown. I was born here 2 months after the war ended, World War II. But it's just such a delight to be here and have contact and be able to pass on the story of what happened here in Terrell, Texas, and in the other cities that the Brits had a school. That so many people have no idea that there is that history in the United States. There were a number of other schemes where we trained the Brits, but this was the one we trained on the British syllabus. And so it made us a British flying school. And it's just a delight to be here and to be able to promote it and talk to people about it. It's a wonderful story.
It is indeed. Take us back to 1940, 1941. That's when the concept of this sort of was brewing in the on both sides of the ocean, in Great Britain and in the United States. I mean, most military leaders of the time knew that there was the possibility that the United States would get pulled into World War II. Great Britain's already involved, and they wanted to build up their number of pilots that they had. And of course, if you know anything about English weather, it's not the best for learning how to fly, and there's always the threat of the German Luftwaffe being over coming over and attacking, especially for training bases, it would be disastrous. So the United States and Canada ended up being places where a lot of RAF pilots were trained during the war. But this particular program, the British Training Flying School, was very unique.
Yes, it was basically it's a contracting program, and so the British were able to contract with private training schools to train pilots, get some young men their wings, as they say.
Right.
And then after that period, they would move on to the more advanced training where you would train on, the plane you might fly in service. So, for example, a Lancaster bomber or a Hurricane fighter, that sort of thing. And it was they had about 6 of these schools around the country. Another location was Mesa, Arizona, where they had a training school. And there were several others. But this was the first one to open. The first British pilots arrived dressed in civilian clothes because we were still neutral, but the Lend-Lease Act of March 1941 allowed for the U.S. government to supply aircraft. And so they ended up going to Canada by ship. Then they took the train down. Of course, they put on civilian clothes. They took the train down to Texas, and eventually the school actually started doing some training in Love Field in, let's say, about June of 41. And then by August, September of 41, they're here in Terrell, Texas, which is about a 30-minute drive for those who aren't that familiar from downtown Dallas. We're on I-20 just east of Dallas. And they started their training here as early as August, September of 41. And, of course, there was no airfield here before. The local citizens purchased the property, which was mainly cotton fields. And then they were able to rapidly process into starting construction of the building and starting to lay down the concrete for the tarmac. And there was no airport here prior to that. So it was it was a combination of the Lend-Lease Act, the British government, and the local population all coming together. And sort of the connecting tissue to all that was Major Long, who had the training school at Love Field and was an early American aviator. And he then started this school for training British pilots. And they kept it going till September of 45. And Arthur Aaron, one of the young men who came through the program, was a recipient of the Victoria Cross. The actor Robert Hardy, younger people who might watch this program might know him as a character named Fudge from the Harry Potter movies. He died a few years ago, but Robert Hardy was here in late 1945 training at the end of the war. So that's sort of a little bit of a thumbnail of sort of how the whole thing came together here in a small town in East Texas.
One of the interesting aspects of this program was, as you mentioned, there was no airport in Terrell, and the local community had to come up with the funding to be able to put the airport in to host the training school. And the British actually had to pay, I don't remember what the dollar amount was per hour for each of their trainees in basic and advanced training as well. So it was, and all civilian instructors, because that would get you around the Lend-Lease law at the time, correct?
Well, the Lend-Lease was very important because, like I said, of all the equipment that was needed. Mm-hmm. So that really meant, it really helped sort of allowed it all to happen. Really, because of the equipment, because, you need, God only knows how many Stearmans. And then after that, they transferred to the AT-6 Texans, many of which were built in, I believe, South Dallas during the war, at the old North American plant. I think most people in the region would call it the Vought plant. Right, because Vought was there for many, many years, many decades. And Rudy, the importance of the training school to the local economy and also to the local population is hard to it's hard to overstate.
It is because we're time-wise, we're at the end of the Depression, and a lot of people don't have jobs yet, but they're working on it. So it was kind of like, I like to, when I get a group of visitors here, I'll ask them if they are familiar with Amazon trying to move their headquarters to New York City. And New York City said, we don't want you. And they didn't go. Well, it was just the opposite here. One of our displays in the museum is a display that was of an article published in the Terrell Tribune, which is still the newspaper in Terrell, that listed the people that had donated money. And interestingly, because I was a native of Terrell, a lot of those names on there are very familiar to me as being families of kids I went to school with, their parents. Interesting note on that, there was one gentleman on there, Mr. W.P. Allen. He donated $2,500 of his own money. But he was also president of the American National Bank. He donated $5,000 toward the purchase, and including that, he owned Buddy Allen Chevrolet, which I might say I bought my first new car from. But they donated $500. So he accounted for about $8,000 of the $35,000 that we raised to get the land. The Brits couldn't buy the land because we didn't allow foreign ownership of land at that point in our history. That's different now, of course. But it was interesting. The last person on the list that they published gave $10. So it went the gamut. There were lawyers, doctors, all kinds of people that got the school here because they donated money to help pay for getting it on site.
That's amazing. And what was the layout of the airfield like when it was active?
It was started out with no runways. They built the hangars first, and then they built the barracks. A lot of this construction was going on at the same time. But they got the hangars built, and the barracks and the training rooms and the flight operations building and everything. Interesting, if you look at some pictures in the museum, you'll see that there's knotty pine paneling on all the walls in the classrooms, in the canteen, everything. Well, that was because the nearest resource for construction was East Texas pines, and that's where they got all the wood from. So you can tell there's a picture of the Bass drugstore, and there's paneling in it. There's no knotty pine, so we know that's not here at the school. And I tell people that, so, just pay attention to the pictures. If it's got knotty pine paneling in it, it's here at the school, all the classrooms and everything. But it was an economic boom for the city, because up until then, the largest employer here was agriculture and the mental hospital, and it was tough. A lot of people came from the hospital out here because they could make more money. Yeah.
Well, the picture we're looking at right now is some of the British trainees at the drugstore, and I love this just not only for the fashion, but if you can read the menu, you can get a sandwich for 15 cents. and hot chili for 15 cents.
Every time when I look at what they charge to get a combo meal at a burger joint these days, I go walk into the museum and I look at that photo and I go, 15 cents for a bowl of chili, man. That was a hell of a deal. And but yeah, it's what was the old joke? Some of the old timers used to say stuff like, "Well, I remember when $1 was worth $1," sort of a thing, But yeah, I mean, looking at the difference in prices and things like that, and the basic suit that they wear is similar to a suit that you or I might wear, but the cut is different, obviously. The lapels are always going in and out, right, over every 4 or 5 years, and But it's, you can see how sort of, shall we say, clean cut and well dressed they are on their day off. And so they would march from the airfield, the barracks, on Sunday morning, and those who wanted to go to church would peel off to whichever church was their preference. And then a lot of them would spend part of Sunday sometimes with local families. And that was sort of it wasn't just a good relationship with the local families. They became very sort of close. And they just didn't have a good relationship. It was something that became more a deeper relationship. And some of them even moved back here, like Mr. Madgwick, who about 20 years ago was mayor and was a city councilman. Also a very important figure in getting a lot of the baseball field complex put together. And he was a Britisher who came back here and settled down, married into a local family, and became part of the community. So it was a very, very strong attachment that they found with the local citizens. And I've looked at a letter where a gentleman, I believe, from Liverpool wrote to a local family. And he says, he calls them his friend. He says, "We don't know each other, but I've received word about you from my son," probably like a 20-year-old young man, right, about how nice you've been to him. And I wanted to write to you and tell you how much I appreciate you embracing this young man who's, thousands of miles away from home. And so it was it was a real special rapport between the cadets and some of these local families. And we try and reflect that in the exhibits. And it's something that it was a lasting impression on the local populace.
And on those students that came across too, I'm sure. Go ahead, Rudy.
We have a cadet that's still living, and he calls the family he lived with Mother Cowan, C-O-W-A-N, and Father Cowan, because on the weekends he would go to their home. I don't know if they slept over or not, but here in town. But these close relationships, and we've benefited from a lot of that, because a lot of the people here, they're extended family. Most of the cadets are not living, but now their grandchildren, their nieces and nephews, they come over to see where their relative trained, and to maybe meet some of the people that made it like home for them, all that far from their actual home. Just a wonderful feel-good story, which I consider to be one of the main stories about our museum is the interaction between the locals and the cadets while they were here. And they really were appreciative of how they were treated.
Yeah, to sort of swing back, because I want to make sure we answered your question. There are basically only two buildings, two large hangars that exist from the airport that was built for World War II purposes. They're now used for light industrial work by private companies. And I guess you would say the orientation of the airport has moved south, closer to I-20. And that area where all the original buildings were close to those hangars is now sort of light industrial and other buildings. All the other buildings are gone. Even the control building and tower, which they had, was been gone, 20, 30 years?
Yes, long time.
And so they do have a new terminal building, which they built about 12 years ago now.
Mm-hmm.
But it is further south, closer to the interstate than where we're sitting at. We're further on the north side of the airport. We've been in this building. It's an old hangar building for about 20 years. I think it'll be 20 years this fall that we'll have been in this building. And the exhibits were redone about 5 years ago. Rudy worked on that. And so our exhibits are, for those who haven't been here in a long time, they should come back and see the exhibits that we have now. And so we're on the more northern side of the airport, and the new terminal is further on the south side of what would be the main runway.
Okay. And the building that you're in now was not part of the original training school?
No, this was I'll call it a post-war hangar.
Okay.
That was probably built, I would say, I'm not exactly sure the construction date. I'd say probably the 1960s.
And when the British were training, about how many students could this field take on at any one time?
There would usually be two classes or two courses, but they would sometimes overlap. So we trained 2,200 cadets in 4 years. So we had to put them through here pretty quick. And in the British syllabus that I spoke about earlier, that was a much faster program than the American syllabus, because they needed these young men to get back and get to work defending their country. So they had a 6-month time of training here. Originally, they were going to train on 3 aircraft, but the Brits said, we want to knock out the middleman. We just want to train on the Stearman and the AT-6 because they're going to get more training either in Canada or another school in another Commonwealth country. And that's how that part of it happened. They went through here pretty quick.
Also interesting to note is that the instructors had to become familiar with the RAF way of training, not necessarily the way that it was that we trained in the United States.
Right, that was very important. One of the interesting side notes on that is we have a uniform here in the museum on display that has 2 sets of wings on it. It has the British and the American. And that gentleman, he wasn't American, but we did train some, about 150 American cadets here. And they were allowed because they were taught under the British syllabus to wear the wings on the opposite side from their official wings. And the same happens in the American schools where Brits were trained. They got to wear the dual wings, and it was quite a bit of an honor for them to do that. They were very proud of being able to wear both countries' wings. So that kind of goes back to the connection between Great Britain and the United States during the war.
Yeah. Earlier in 2022, we had a webinar where we talked about the Americans who volunteered before Pearl Harbor to go to Canada and train, and they were the RAF American cadets, and the same thing. When they passed, could wear both sets of wings. So it's amazing the amount of training that took place. Not only the Americans training for the Army Air Corps, but also then the foreign nationals who were coming in, or in some cases Americans going to other countries to train as well, to try and bring up the number of pilots necessary for the war effort.
Absolutely.
And so you said the field was in operation for about 4 years. So kind of the eventual shutdown was coincided with the end of the war, I would assume.
Yeah. Basically, within days or a couple of weeks of the dropping of the nuclear weapons on Japan, they had closed the facility up, and they still had some men in the middle of training, and so they had to go back home and continue training, or they might have gotten mustered out of service. So it was sort of a thing, the British, quite frankly, had very limited funds during the whole war. That's why one of the reasons that Lend-Lease was so important to the overall war effort from the United States was the fact that they were short on cash sometimes. And so this became a very important part. It's hard to overstate the importance of Lend-Lease to the war effort, and not just to Britain, but also later to the Soviet Union. Matter of fact, the British also lent or used a various sort of program. I don't know if they technically called it Lend-Lease, but, they sent a lot of Hurricane fighters, for example, and Valentine tanks over to the Soviets to help them stop the initial Russian attack in 1941-42.
It's amazing. Now, were there maintenance facilities at this training school as well?
Yes. Matter of fact, one of the gentlemen in town, an attorney named Tom Snow, his father did some maintenance at the airfield, and his mother worked in the tower. So he had a job up in the tower directing air traffic, if you will. And so both of his parents were employed here. So he tells a story about how his mom let him go up in the tower one time, and he could watch a graduation ceremony of these young men getting their wings before they were to head back for advanced training. And he's in his 80s now,
yes,
Mr. Snow, and we were able to get him on camera and interview him several months ago. And so it was interesting to get a little bit of insight into the fact that here's a young man growing up in town, and both of his, not just one, but both of his parents had employment at some point during the course of the war at the airfield. So what beforehand was a cotton field was now an airfield, not only training with this very important training program, but also an important local employment for a lot of people. I don't have any figures on how many people were employed overall during the war. A lot of the records from the school were actually lost, I believe, in the 1970s. But, it was a very large number of people who were employed, including women. Like the young women were in the tower. They were also part of the link training program.
yes.
And there's a photo of one of the T-6s. It looks like one of the young pilots may have had a little bit of an issue coming in for a landing, if you look at that photo.
Yeah.
But yeah, so, there was, constant maintenance going on both Stearmans and the T-6 Texans. So, you see, we have pictures taken from the air or from the edge of the airfield where you see the Stearmans and the T-6s lined up on the tarmac. And you can see where the mud or the field begins and the tarmac ends, because they laid the tarmac down in sections. You can kind of piece together how they had to lay it down in sections over time.
So all the maintenance was done by local citizens, or did the British send some of their mechanics over to either to learn or to assist with maintenance?
I believe it was mainly locals doing the work. There was, after we got into the war, there was some, for lack of another term, liaison officers, RAF liaison, who were here, of course, to sort of oversee the operations. But it was still a private school run by Major Long, and the British just had a sort of a small cadre of RAF personnel here. It wasn't really a large number because, once again, as long as everything was moving along to their specification, it was sort of like, let them go, let them do it. And
a few of the Brits that were stationed here did participate in some training that was not run of the mill.
Okay.
They actually had marksmanship training on the ground. And that simply was, they would use a shotgun, and it taught them how to lead with target. And that some of those were Brits. There were some others that were connected with navigation. Some of the things that we didn't have enough people that could teach it here in this country. But by and large, the Brits that were stationed here in higher ranks and other positions were administrative. They took care of the discipline of the cadets. They took care of verifying the vouchers for pay for food, any services that were done, laundry, anything that was done here The Brits paid for it, and it was a good thing. It really was.
Now, it's typically in training, especially the primary training, number of cadets get washed out. And what happened to any of the British cadets if they were washed out of training? They just get sent back home?
In doing research here, we got the name of a cadet that graduated from here, and I went looking on the list that we used to have posted, which is now in a book. And that cadet had no record of ever being here. And doing a little bit of research, or a whole lot of research, I thought, well, maybe if this guy wrote a book, and I went to our library, and danged if he hadn't written a book. His name was Berryman, and his first name was Nick. And the title of his book was In the Nick of Time. But what happened, Nick was in one of the American schools, and they were hazed by the American instructors and cadets, and he didn't take it. So they washed him out. Well, Britain had a scheme where they didn't send people back and forth across the ocean to train them. They would send them to a school in Canada, but they went before a board up there after they left here for whatever reason, be it physical, medical, eyesight. They had to have, 20/20 eyesight. But when he got up there to be interviewed by the board, they all looked at his record, and nobody had changed his records. And they said, this guy's a good pilot. He needs to go back and become a pilot. So they sent him to Terrell. Well, he started after the beginning of the course. So he went through the whole course. Well, we're taking photographs that we've got a next example there. The Brits, they would take a picture of their course at the beginning of the course. Americans usually took the picture at the end of the course or class. Mm-hmm. Well, the good thing about that is that all the young men that died from accidents or natural causes here, they're in that course picture with all of their buddies because they took the picture when they first got here. So there was a lot of give and take on that. But come to find out that Nick Berryman was a cadet here, and found out that his son became he was in the RAF for a career, and his grandson. And my wife had the opportunity to on the celebration of the 100th centennial anniversary of the Royal Air Force, we went to Washington for a program, and we met the grandson of Nick Berryman because he was on temporary duty in the United States at that particular time. So it's just really amazing how these almost like Kevin Bacon, 6 degrees separation. And the people were all so appreciative of their time here in the States, and the fact that they were trained so well. They felt very confident in going back and fighting for their country.
Do you know offhand how many pilots were trained overall in all the flying schools?
Our attrition rate here was about between 80 and 90%. But like I say, if they washed out, they went to Canada and they went to either navigation school, bomb aimer school, mm-hmm. or gunnery. But usually they went back and they were a member of a team. There's actually a movie made about the school in Falcon Field in Arizona. And Edward G. Robinson plays one of the American instructors in this movie. And the movie's about a young man who did wash out and became I believe a navigator. A navigator.
Yeah. The very young actor playing the main characters, Richard Attenborough. This was later famous for directing Gandhi and Young Winston. Once again, younger audiences would know him as the billionaire who decides to put dinosaurs on an island in Jurassic Park. This book I'm holding here that I was looking at has a lot of some of the statistical information, and it is the Royal Air Force in Texas training British pilots in Terrell during the war, and it's by Tom Killebrew. And we're hoping to bring Mr. Killebrew in to speak later in the year, in the fall. And this is for sale in the gift shop, and it's a very easy read, and it covers a lot of the specifics. A lot of very definitive numbers are hard to come by because, like I said, the school records were private and they were lost during the 70s. So it makes giving the precise figures that we would wish we could give a little more difficult. But let's see, what was it we were going to? We've got a print here of a portrait painting we'd like to show you, if that's okay.
Sure.
Okay. Yeah, this here is a recent painting. This is a print, obviously, of a recent painting. And it looks like Ivan Berryman is the artist. It's called Outbound from Middenhall. And this particular is of a pilot in October 43 flying over the North Sea. And the pilot is Flight Sergeant Thomas Robertson Ewen, E-W-E-N. And from what we can tell, he was a member, I think it was Course 3, but don't quote me on that. He was from the number 1 BFTS, and this is a portrait of his mission over the North Sea. Unfortunately, it was his first mission and only mission because they were shot down over the North Sea on this mission inside a 4-engine Sterling bomber built by Short Brothers. I think a lot of them were built up in Belfast, Northern Ireland. But yeah, so this is interesting was when we discovered this, that someone had painted a portrait of a specific mission flown by a pilot from number 1 BFTS. So it was it's an interesting piece of artistry, very beautifully done. And it's interesting because it profiles, obviously, a mission by a pilot who was trained here at BFTS. And so, all these training programs, including the school program, of which we were one of 6, were all just an important cog in that huge wheel that is World War II and preparation for the war and trying to win the war, which we thankfully did. Let's go over can we go over a couple of items from the collection?
Sure. I was just transition into the museum itself. But before I know you've got a table full of goodies there, and I'm looking forward to seeing them. But just a little background on the museum itself. When did it start, and what was the impetus for starting the museum?
Well, Rudy, I'll let you handle that.
It seems that one of the things that we haven't addressed is that we had approximately 40 cadets come back to the United States after the war. Some of them to this area, some of them to other areas. They came back. The number one reason was because they found a partner for life, and they came back. But some of them came back simply to get a job, and because they couldn't get jobs in England at that time. But about 40 cadets came back to this country, and they formed a branch of the Alumni Association, we'll call it. In England, they formed a North American branch. And they got to talking, and they said, well, my children are probably not going to want all my doodads and things that I got from here that I think are so special when I'm gone. Wouldn't it be nice if we had a place we could give those things or have those things where people could see them. They could come and visit and see them. So they sent a request out to a solicitation to all the cadets that were still in the association that survived the war. And they got quite a bit of response with uniforms and things like that. And originally, those items were put in our Carnegie Library here in Terrell, which is our city historical society building. It's actually in one of the few surviving Carnegie libraries in the country. They were there for a while, and then the Glider Museum, which was located here in Terrell at the time, but has since left and gone to Lubbock, they made an offer by the city of Lubbock that they couldn't refuse. So this building came available, and the city leased it to the music to us for a museum, and that's how we got started. That was in 2003.
Okay.
And we've been ginning along ever since.
Well, one of the things that we've been doing the last year is we've been sort of upping our games in terms of our educational programming. So, and I've got some flyers here. We've got a documentary screening in February, and I won't hold this up too close. I'll try and send copies of this to y'all. And then we also have a lecture by Dr. Scott Palmer on January 19th, 2023. He's going to talk about how the Soviets and Weimar Germany sort of did some training together in the 20s and early 30s, which a lot of people don't talk about, and some people just don't know about. It's not part of what you call popular history. And so he's coming this January, and we've done a number of programs. We've screened documentaries. We've had people come and talk on everything from Rosie the Riveter to the Vaught Aircraft Restoration Group that works in the Arlington area, to parachutes used during World War II. That was a recent talk we had a few months ago. So we tried to do a lot of, relevant educational programs for the local populace and the regional population, and we're offering a lot of that free of charge. So come in on a Thursday evening and you can learn something about World War II. And the documentary like The Cold Blue, which we'll be showing in February, is sort of a follow-up to a couple of other documentaries that we've shown, one of which was a general history of the bombing of Germany and part of that strategic air campaign during the war. And then another was about one of the weapons used during that war, which was the Handley Page Halifax, the famous British 4-engine bomber. There's one that's restored to static display up in Canada. Mm-hmm. So we were able to sort of try, and if you come here, the object is over time, over say 3 or 4 year period, you'll get a lot of different programs, but some of them will sort of be interconnected, dealing with that bombing campaign over Germany in World War II, or maybe weapons of war. And some of these will interlace with each other over time. So that's one of the things that we've been doing and that we want to continue to do into the future. And, as we change things out in the exhibits, we've got a number of items that I'd like to show, if that's okay.
Sure. Let's take a look.
So some of the things that these particular items that I might hold up are not necessarily on display, but there are a lot of very similar items that we have on display. So yeah, it's representative. So here's a pilot's log from World War II. The pilots would all keep these logs of their flying hours, as part of their training and their period as a pilot and a pilot trainee. This was brought in by a gentleman who said that he got this from people who had worked here at the airfield, and they used these little sort of pot metal miniature aircraft. This is like a miniature, hold it like this. You can see from the wing outline like a Spitfire. Mm-hmm. So you can use this for training. He said they were used for training purposes, and as a small child, they played with it as a toy. So it was an interesting thing that came full circle back to the museum. So that's an interesting item. And here we have is a book about pilots and flight engineers' notes for, once again, the Halifax, famous British bomber from the war, which we mentioned a minute ago. And so these sorts of manuals that were commonly in use during the war are sorts of things that we've received and we put out on display to tell the story of training in World War II and the BFGS. An interesting item, this was in a magazine during the war, and this photo shows looks like from Look magazine in 1942. This was taken at the First Methodist Church here in town, and this shows a couple of young ladies with an unidentified RAF cadet, and they're at like a dance or something like that. And the interesting thing is the rather large cowboy hat that the British RAF cadet has on. It's something else, and they just like they're just having a blast at this reception here in town. And so we keep a lot of these sorts of items. We also have one of our late board members who passed away a couple of years. His estate has a rifle collection that he left in his estate. It's on display here. And we have some radial engines, right, Rudy?
Mm-hmm.
That we have on display.
2 radial engines.
And we have a 1/3 scale model of a Stearman.
Yes.
That was brought to us about a little under 2 years ago now. And that's on top of one of our display cases, a beautifully rendered, beautiful model, 1/3 scale of the Stearman, which of course was an important biplane trainer during the war.
Yep.
And absolutely vital to the war effort. And so we have photos that were preserved from all the courses that came through and did their training here. Lots of photos of the various flight instructors that were here. They subdivided the flight instructors into little, little training groups, flights and so they would take certain pilots or trainees and put them through the system in their flight. And we also have a link trainer on display, which is partially restored. And we have a memorial room for the pilots. There were about 20 cadets that were killed training. Learning how to fly is a very dangerous business. So we have a memorial sort of chapel set up here in the corner of the exhibit space showing photos of all these 20 young men who died while training here in East Texas. And so we also have a lot of war memorabilia from both the Pacific Theater and the European Theater. And we also have a whole section dealing with aircraft construction. So we have a section of exhibits that sort of give people an idea of how they built not only the biplanes like the Stearman, but more advanced monoplanes like the T-6 Texan. It gives them an idea of the amount of work required to put one of these machines together. So we've got some fairly extensive exhibits here, and we like to display a lot of the material that we've been given over time.
A couple of very important items in our collection. We actually have 2 airplanes. One is an AT-6. Actually, it's a Harvard, which is the British version of the AT-6, but they were trained on American versions. The Harvards were the ones that we exported that they actually bought. And then we have a post-World War II jet provost trainer. And people ask, well, why have you got because that's the next generation after the war, is they figured out that the future was in jets, rockets, and that sort of thing. So they changed from the propeller trainer that they were going to use into the jet provost, and they used it for approximately 25 years. And we have one of those that was bought by someone in the States and brought over here, but they never got it restored. And we were able to, they were generous enough to donate it to us. So that's a project that we're going to work on eventually?
Yeah, the T6 is currently undergoing some restoration work. So it's not inside the museum proper. We have it in another facility where it's undergoing some reassembly. And so that's another ongoing project for us.
Awesome. Well, just a few minutes left, but I want to give you both an opportunity to share any final thoughts or anything that we've missed that you want to make sure that our audience knows about the training school. Rudy, let's start with you.
I will bring up one thing that we've talked about it, but we talked around it. There were actually 7 schools originally. The 7th school was in Sweetwater, Texas, and we did not graduate a class there because the Army Air Corps came in and said, "You guys are going to have to shut this down because we're going to use this to train ladies to fly." And the rest of that is history, and a lot of it, because that's a big part. But they simply took those cadets that were there and passed them out to the schools around in Oklahoma and here and in Arizona, and they just went right on with their training. But it's a neat. We have an exhibit here displaying some of their memorabilia, and we're very proud of the fact that if we lost a school, it went to a very good place in history.
Yeah. And one of our future projects is the city is working on a building downtown. It's about roughly a mile from here. Mm-hmm. And this building on Moore Avenue, which is also Highway 80, right, is going to be worked on and refurbished to a very large extent by the city. And we're going to have exhibits in this building in the future, in a few years from now. So it's a large project, and we're, of course, doing the usual sort of going out and trying to raise money for the project and working on that. And we are a 501c3. We're a nonprofit, and out here at the Terrell Airport. And we're open Wednesdays through Saturdays, 10 to 4. Obviously, certain holidays we might be closed, but pretty much Wednesday through Saturday, 10 to 4. And there is no charge for touring. We also show about a 10, 12-minute film as an orientation film. And we, of course, as we always like to say in the nonprofit world, we do accept donations.
Of course. And you mentioned some of the things coming up, your speaker series, your documentaries. How do people stay in touch with you? Obviously, you've got a website, but are you on Facebook and other social media so people know what special events are coming up?
Yeah, our primary social media page is Facebook.
Okay.
And so you can find us there at Facebook/1BFTS. And also we have bftsmuseum.org, which is our website. So you can check us out there. And that's a good way to keep an eye on our upcoming programs. And, we, of course, invite people to come and tour the exhibits and come to some of our educational programs. And, we always look forward to seeing people. We have people come from not only England, but from various other countries around the globe. People from Canada and all over the United States come by and visit us. And we get a very good reaction, I think it's fair to say, for our exhibits and for what we do from the general public. A lot of very nice compliments, which we greatly appreciate because it's, museums, it's always a struggle running them and getting the, financial income streams coming in that you need to do everything that you want to do. So we're always very happy that we receive such positive feedback from the public.
Yes, I was reading a lot of the reviews online of the museum, and very, very complimentary, not only of the content within the museum, but also the staff and the folks who help show visitors around, and just a lot of great comments about the friendly, very knowledgeable staff that you have there. So congratulations, and thank you for sharing your passion with our audience tonight, and of course with all the visitors at your museum.
Oh, thank you so much. We're very honored to be included. We always appreciate everything that you guys do. And we look forward to working with you guys in the future, and, invite everybody to come and see us, and God bless and take care.
All right. Well, if you're in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, the museum is about 45 minutes or so east of Dallas, downtown Dallas or so. So it's a short drive out into the countryside, and go have a look at the #1 British Flying Training School Museum in Terrell, Texas. Well, I'd like to thank everybody for joining us for this episode of CAF Warbird Tube. Again, don't forget to click that like, subscribe, or follow button, and we'll let you know about any of our future shows that are coming up. Plus, if you have an idea for a topic you'd like to hear more about, send Leah Block an email at media@cafhq.org. Thank you again to Patrick and Rudy for sharing their insights on the British Flying Training School and the museum this evening. I'm your host, Steve Buss. Have a great night.